when you put your arms around. I give a fever that's so hard to bear. You give me fever. When you kiss me, fever when you hold me tight. Fever. In the morning, fever all through the night.
What the fuck happened last night? Hey, Phil.
Am I missing a tooth?
Oh.
Oh my god, I look like a nerdy hillbilly.
Coming to you from fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada, this is the JuggLife podcast with Chad Wesley Smith and Max Ada. Hey everybody, Chad Wesley Smith here, bringing you another episode of the JuggLife podcast. I'm joined, as always, by magnanimous Max Montana. How you doing, buddy?
Doing pretty well. How you guys?
And we are coming to you from the garage of the Rhino in the 26th most populous city in America, Las Vegas, Nevada. Stan Efferding, how you doing, buddy?
Good, man. I'm doing great. Thanks for coming out.
Our pleasure. Thanks for having us, for hosting us. Today's episode is brought to you by, clearly, The Cooler, which you can find at thecoolerwithak.com, and Ground Bison and Big Thighs Son. It's a lifestyle. So today we're going to be talking to Stan about all kinds of different stuff, some of the exciting work that he's doing with some of the strongest men in the world, as well as going in depth with him about his ideas about goal setting, process orientation, and how to sort of improve that critical mental aspect of not just training, but how it can really apply to all sort of different aspects of your life. So because we always got a lot to cover with you, let's just go ahead and jump right into it. You got a new client, sort of a big deal. He's a big guy. So tell us about what you're doing with 4-time World's Strongest Man Brian Shaw.
Yeah, huge deal. Last year I worked with Hafthor Bjornsson, and I'm actually working with him again this year. And he had realized some improvement, even as strong as he was. Mm-hmm. He realized some improvement through doing the nutrition planning that we implemented together. And so Brian Shaw, I think, took notice, because Hafthor had increased almost all of his lifts and set some records, some personal bests. And so Brian asked me to jump in and see if I couldn't take a look at his nutrition program and make some adjustments and improvements. And we were able to come up with a good plan, and he's enjoying it so far. It's only about a couple weeks in, so we'll have to see what happens at the Arnold. We'll run hard through the Arnold and the World's Strongest Man. These two will go head to head. I think they're top 2 in the world right now.
Now, are they trying to slip you extra cash under the table? Be like, well, maybe fuck Thor's playing up a little bit.
A lot of people worry about that, the whole conflict of interest thing. But this goes on all the time in the UFC. I talked to some great trainers. George Lockhart is one who works with a lot of athletes, even those that compete against each other. Mm-hmm. And there isn't a strategic element involved in my coaching. I don't actually coach the events. Mine is just about general health. Performance enhancement through good nutrition. And a lot of what I do is, I'm kind of a detective. I ask a ton of questions and I poke around and try and find out where they're not doing things that they know they should, and maybe prioritizing things preferentially that causes them, for example, something as simple as sleep and the quality of that sleep. We delve into that in a very, specific fashion to try and optimize that. And logistics, things like having food when you need it, meal prep, traveling, and ways to make that easier, more convenient so they don't have, because with their schedules, Brian was just at the LA Fit Expo. Next weekend he's going to be in Sacramento at Mark Bell's event, to my understanding. And those kinds of things take a pretty significant amount of planning for somebody who has to eat that many calories that often.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of the videos of him talking about his diet and his food intake. What is a 6'8", 450-pound man putting away calories-wise?
with quality calories, you can get away with 6,000, 7,000. When you're using, sometimes when people eat more than that, 8, 9, 10,000, a lot of those calories really don't contribute to strength or lean body mass. A lot of those calories are just calorie dense, generally fats. And I try and be careful with how much fats I throw in. So it's actually harder to eat 6,000 to 7,000 calories of, quote unquote healthy foods, leaner red meats, lower fat diet, than it is to eat 9 or 10,000 calories of a 60% fat diet. And I try and stay away from a lot of those foods because I think that they cause all kinds. They cause fatty liver, insulin resistance, and now you're storing fat instead of building muscle. So the goal is to try and get them foods that actually are used and partitioned preferentially towards muscle repair and growth and recovery. So that long answer to a 6,000 to 7,000 calorie clean diet.
How big a difference is there between, I mean, obviously those guys might be more specific, but how big a difference is there between the diets of somebody like Hafthor versus Brian Shaw, where, I mean, they're both on that far end of the spectrum being giant men, competing in the same sport, but is there individual differences? Are there big ones, or?
No, not between them, but between them and other athletes. The calories is, ultimately, I've always said that it's a calorie equation at the end of the day, whether you're working towards a deficit to lose weight or a surplus to gain weight. And beyond that, I try and make sure that their body is receptive to the foods that I'm feeding them so that they can utilize them quicker with less waste and less digestive difficulty, because they do have to eat a lot of food. And so they're pretty similar. High calories is what we shoot for, and then I try and, historically Hafthor had a pretty high calorie diet, and he had reached a certain body weight at which he felt he wasn't getting any stronger and he wasn't gaining any muscle. He felt he was getting fatter. And so when you do the blood tests and find out that they might be deficient in vitamin D, or they might not be using a CPAP when they sleep, or they might be insulin resistant and have borderline prediabetes in some cases, you have to remedy those problems first, and that fixes and can quickly change their insulin sensitivity. So now and stop feeding them so many fats and start feeding them higher quality proteins, and they respond. So Hafthor was able to lose some weight, improve his body composition, lost most of the body fat, and then get stronger. It's kind of a process. Sometimes when you initially drop weight, as happens with a lot of athletes, you lose strength. Because to drop weight, you're cutting back on some fats, you're cutting back on some carbs, you're losing some weight, hopefully primarily fat, and then when you reintroduce the carbs, then that's when you start to build strength without gaining all the fat.
And something that you touched on a little bit earlier that was very interesting to me is as you go through this analysis of what the athlete's currently doing and what they're doing well and maybe what they're not doing well. Did you find any with guys who are that high level and that successful, any pushback in any of those areas in terms of like you identifying something as a weakness and them kind of not agreeing with you or not maybe willing to take ownership of it, and not even necessarily these two guys, but just athletes in general?
The biggest complaint I get is that it costs more to eat clean food. When you move from shakes and pizzas and IHOP and Subway meatball sandwiches and burritos at Chipotle to top sirloin steak, New York steak, grass-fed bison burger, there's a cost associated with that. There's also a cost associated with the blood work, which I think is paramount, particularly for a competitive athlete at that level. I don't think I could do my job without that information. So usually it's the cost associated with the whole thing. And then also the cost associated with, again, I talked about the logistics of traveling, having your meals there when you get there, having a kitchenette when you arrive, traveling during the day, maybe staying an extra night so you don't end up getting there at 1 a.m. or having to get up at 4 a.m. to depart. And then when you get there, do you have everything that you need? I mentioned last year at the Arnold, I got there a week early with Hafthor, and he was at the host hotel, which did not have a big enough fridge for him, and it didn't have a rice maker. So I went down to Costco, and I got a fridge and a rice maker and a microwave and a dolly to put it all on. And I wheeled it right in the host hotel's front doors and right up the elevator, and we just set everything up in his room. And then I got a hotel that had a barbecue grill, because being able to eat that much food requires you to make the food that you like, because it's going to be very repetitive and it's going to be in a massive quantity. Not only does the food have to be easy to digest, but it has to be tasty. And I used some tips and tricks there with them to help them with that. But one of the big things was barbecue grilling his steak. And so I got a hotel that had a barbecue grill, and it was like 20 degrees and snowing. And I was outside flipping
It was a very cold
steaks,
Arnold last year.
in the snow, and making sure that he had, all that. And then sometimes when you get to where you're going, maybe the food that you typically want isn't available.
Right.
In Europe recently, I talked about the bison burger, and my clients from the UK and the European countries were complaining they can't get it there.
They get like reindeer.
Yeah, and it's not, it's not meant to be that specific. So my advice to them was to go to a butcher, get their favorite cut of meat, and then have it ground for them.
Yeah.
Or in Bride Shaw's case, he just got a meat grinder at home, and he still went to Costco and got his steaks, and then came home and just ran them through the grinder. And the purpose of that is it makes it a little easier to eat more, which is necessary in his case, and to digest it a little easier. So that all of those things, are really important, and that's the only difficulty I really have. I don't get too much pushback from athletes. I think us as competitors realize that when you work with somebody that you respect, like I did with Flex Wheeler, I did with Mark Bell, it's a bit of a collaboration. You come together. I try and find out, I ask them very specifically what foods make you feel better and what foods are you to have potential allergy to or make you bloated. And we dig into all of that to try and pick out which foods to use.
You mentioned sleep and analyzing the athlete's sleep, and certainly for people that are 450 pounds, the CPAP is going to be a part of that. But do you have any other metrics that you can share with us as far as measurement of quality of sleep? I mean, beyond just a certain number of hours, but things you're looking for to know that the athlete is utilizing that most essential means of recovery?
Yeah. Now, generally speaking, when I look at their sleep, we look at, do they wake up refreshed or are they tired? And that can be reflected in high blood sugars. It can be reflected in high blood pressure. It can be reflected in high morning resting heart rate. And we look at all of those things. The morning resting heart rate is significant because if they're overtrained, then we need to back off. And so we do include that metric in all of our...
Do you use heart rate variability, like an app for that?
Recovery? No, I haven't used an app yet. I just asked them to check it and to continue to monitor it. If we determine, and with most athletes, if you're over 250 pounds and you're lifting weights, generally speaking, you're having some apnea episodes. It's pretty common. And so,
what about awake apnea? I've known a few. My friend Brandon Allen, he before he lost all this weight, he was big on the awake apnea.
The narcolepsy.
Just kind of like.
Yeah.
We'll talk to him tomorrow. But
Mouth breathing.
Yeah. Well, and breathing's huge, as we know. We work so much on the circumferential breathing and getting in enough air. And if you actually take your time to think about that during the day, you can improve your breathing. But with respect to sleep, I do encourage the CPAP. A lot of people, especially internationally, have a difficult time getting a hold of one of those because they got to go through the whole doctor process. It's socialized medicine. In the States, they're incredibly expensive and time-consuming, and the medical lobby has made it such that you have to go to a sleep doctor and get it prescribed to you and then use some sort of medical devices company. And they're like $2,000 for a machine. And I got two of them, one for me and one for my stepson a couple years ago, and it's like buying a car. They set you up on a lease, $200 a month forever, and they're in your pocket. And I think it's outrageous. And so I've said that on many occasions that I've just gone on Craigslist, just in your local city, and there's probably 50 of them sitting there for $200. And I encourage them to do that immediately. I actually will go on Craigslist for them and find the one and send them a link and tell them you need to buy this tomorrow because it's life-changing. But there's other little things, what I call, see if I can remember the term, just important things that you have to do to get proper sleep. And there's a whole list that I give them. And I call it practicing good sleep hygiene. And one of it is a dark room. get blackout blinds, because if there's any lights in the room, night lights or other stuff, obviously we all know at least an hour before bed, get away from your phones and your TVs, because the light from that impairs melatonin release, which is how your body prepares itself for sleep. Another one is the circadian rhythms. Your body is gets optimum sleep when you're sleeping from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. or 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Those are optimal, and you can't mess with those. If you work nights and sleep days, you'll never optimize your sleep. It's impossible. The circadian rhythms are within us, and it's part of our hormonal structure. The vitamin D is obviously a huge one, and I get blood tests on that. There's another thing we get with Brian Shaw, had low vitamin D. Hugely effective for increasing insulin sensitivity, sleep, immune system. You don't get colds as often when your vitamin D is improved. Your calcium absorption, which can be really important for athletes. And then things like waking up at the same time every day rather than on the weekends having a bender or something like that. Because those things can set you back, 48 hours, 2 full days of training. Just one horrible night of sleep will set you back for 2 whole days. And all that recovery, the vast majority of that recovery happens during deep sleep and REM sleep. And the more deep sleep you can get and the more REM sleep you can get, the more recovery. And here's what's huge, and this is important, say, with weightlifters, is that skills are ingrained during sleep. If you learn a skill and you sleep on it, your body creates the right muscle pattern, the recognition, all of that. The same thing is true when you're learning something like calculus or studying or shooting 3-pointers. The practice is great, but those practices don't become neurological until you've slept on them. And they found this by studying people who will perform certain activities or do certain mental activities and testing them later in the day, as opposed to those who sleep overnight have a better recovery, either memory or for skill set. And the reason it's important to talk about that is because you're way better off doing, as we've come to find out more recently, brief, they say perfect practice makes perfect, brief but very consistent. Hence why weightlifters tend to train with a lot more frequency than powerlifters or bodybuilders or strongmen.
Yeah.
Because it's a skill sport. And so if they can get in 2 sessions a day or 12 sessions a week, it's better than 4 sessions a week. But you wouldn't necessarily say that to a strongman, right, because of the fatigue that would build up, because it's a skill.
Yeah, I talk about that a lot at seminars, and we'll refer to the SRA curve, stimulus recovery adaptation, and that all these different physical qualities, whether it's looking for hypertrophic gains or technical improvements, and then the different lifts and stuff have a different length kind of curve of introducing the stimulus, there being fatigue generated from that, and then the recovery adaptive process after it. And
sleep is a huge component of that.
And I usually use golf as like kind of the most extreme example compared to powerlifting.
Yeah.
That a golf swing is highly, highly technical, very low intensity. But you would never find a PGA Tour golfer who's like, oh yeah, I just play Tuesdays and Saturdays with my buddies. Yeah. It's 18 in the morning, 18 in the afternoon. Yeah. 5, 6, 7 days a week like that, because any time away from it, they become rusty, for lack of a better term, very quickly. While something less technical, bench, squat, deadlift, you could get away with doing less frequently, but when it is treated like a technical skill and more frequent exposure to it, you're going to have more quick uptake on the motor learning.
Yeah. And I do that with training blocks too. I like to do strength blocks and hypertrophy blocks. And during the hypertrophy block, I try and minimize impact on the lumbar spine, because that will increase fatigue and central nervous system overload, and can delay recovery, increase DOMs. And so, but I don't want them to get too far. If they're a power lifter doing a hypertrophy block, I don't want them to get too far away from those motor learning patterns. Yeah. So I'll put the squats as a high bar at the end of the workout, so that it doesn't have as much fatigue building properties, but there's still getting those patterns, muscle patterns working.
Right, because you're going to use less weight at the end, right?
Yeah,
you're going to
absolutely.
be so tired already. How does blood work and stuff? I know you talk about blood work a lot, but how does that factor into how often is somebody like who's working with you going to get blood work done?
Well, initially it's imperative, and then what you like to do is, if you implement some sort of corrective procedure to manage any deficiency or surplus whether it be high iron or whether it be low vitamin D or what have you. It could be hormonally with testosterone or thyroid, et cetera. Blood sugar, C-reactive protein for inflammation. There's so many different great markers that can help you. The important thing is, I think, then to retest those items that you were trying to correct within 30 to 60 days, which can be a less expensive proposition because you're only testing a smaller number of indicators. And so I think you do have to have two. You have to have an initial and you have to have a follow-up that hopefully identifies that this is working. I'm a bit of a hypochondriac, and I knew that powerlifting and bodybuilding wasn't exactly the most healthy pursuit, and I was going to be compromising my health. I did that video on it that if you want to be healthy, don't compete.
Yeah.
That's just kind of where you got to be, and so I would do them monthly. I would 90 days out, 60 days out, 30 days out, and then the day after a meet. I wanted to see just how horribly I'd messed myself up.
Black sludge comes out.
Yeah. I want to be the devil's advocate on that. And so I could track and utilize that. And during powerlifting as compared to bodybuilding blocks, I could see how it affected my health.
They're like, sir, your blood has actually melted the syringe.
Yeah. So that's the best tool, I think, for measuring the most significant potential deficiencies. If you're low in magnesium or iron or zinc or any of those things, it's going to have a huge impact on performance. And so we try and remedy those. And just popping multivitamins doesn't get you there, because if you increase your vitamin D, it also increases calcium absorption. Next thing you know, you're suffer from hypercalcemia, and that's not a good place to be either. Most of the research suggests that megadosing vitamins causes more problems than it solves, and increases all-cause mortality and cancers. And so I'm real cautious. I'm not a big pill pusher. And in saying that, the reason why is because if you can get the bulk of those nutrients from food seems to have a bit of a self-metering mechanism as compared to supplements. You can easily, get too high in fat-soluble vitamins in particular, like vitamin A, et cetera, when supplementing, but it's really hard to do that when eating food.
Yeah, a lot easier to take 10 pills than it is to eat 10 steaks.
Yeah.
So, I think that'll be a good point to take a quick break. You guys to learn about the Beginner's Guide to Powerlifting. So if you have less than a year of serious training experience and are interested in competing in powerlifting, this is the product for you, put together by yours truly. So learn a little bit about that, and then we'll be back with Stan Efferding to talk about goal setting. All right, we are back on the JuggLife podcast with Stan Efferding, and with the new year upon us, 2018. I just saw a post up on your Instagram, and you had all these different sheets up with 2018 written at the top. And of course, this is a time of New Year's resolution and new goals for a lot of people, and the goal setting process is so important, I think, for success as an athlete, as a coach, as a business person, as a person. But I think there's good ways to do it, bad ways to do it, better ways to do it. Tell us about the goal setting process for you and for people that you work with.
Well, it's so familiar to us because we've been doing it all our lives competitively. But a goal without a plan is just a dream. It's 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. None of us would go into a competition without having created a plan. We'd back up from the day of competition to whatever today is and try and build those blocks, whether it be with training or nutrition, body weight, what have you. Not as many people do that in many other aspects of their life. That's why I've often said if a highly successful bodybuilder, powerlifter, strongman, weightlifter, competitive athlete in general, would spend the same amount of time and energy and discipline and consistency invested into planning for their sport into any income-producing venture, they'd be a millionaire within 5 years because they formulate a plan, they break it down into a progression, and they invest a significant amount of time and discipline and energy into it. We sleep, eat, breathe our sports. And if we would do that with any other venture, we would be just as successful in that. But what I find is that people talk a lot about what they want to do, and they might even share it with a number of people. And all those people, oh yeah, that'd be great. And they almost get a sense of affirmation that, okay, they think I can do it, I think I can do it, well then why even bother trying to do it? You know what I mean? And actually initiating starting the goal is what is most important. I also find that we as athletes tend to think that the harder that we train, the better the result can be, but we forget that we had to build into that. We started with the bar and 135, 2 1/4. We started somewhere, and so oftentimes when we help an athlete, we have to be careful to get them to progress from where they're currently at, and not take them from 0 to 100. We take them 0 to 1, 1 to 2, and you gradually build into the intensity and all the other information they have to learn and stuff. I find the same thing in businesses. Folks think that they have to do this huge amount of work to get started, but that's not the case. You just do a little more than you did yesterday. You just have to create a consistent plan, and so write it down, break it down into steps, and then invest, like I said about learning skills, just 20 minutes or 30 minutes a day, and then eventually that turns into an hour. But if it's consistent and it's repetitive, it builds upon itself, and your success will tell you, or the journey will demand of you to do what's most important to continue the journey. When you're training, you might have to sleep more and eat more. When you're in business, you might have to get some assistance maybe with your financials or legal help or computer help. Those things will come in the future. Don't try and solve all those things initially. I found that I wanted to do everything perfect. I wanted everything to be perfect before I grew. And I had a great business partner who was from the inner city of Detroit. His pops died in jail, and mom divorced and married 8 times, and it's just one of those kind of childhoods. Most of his friends are dead or in jail in a real tough inner city. So he has these street smarts where he'll just keep pushing the envelope. I'm in there in business trying to figure out, is everything running perfectly? Creating systems, putting so that the thing's scalable and all this other stuff. And he, behind the scenes, was running more advertising. And I'm getting these busy signals, and the calls are coming in like crazy, and I'm trying to figure out how to solve the problem, while it's happening. And in that way, I make the improvements that are necessary. I'm almost forced to do it, And I think I'm not doing a very good job of talking about the two together, but when you're in sports, you keep pushing yourself. When you're in business and you're planning, you keep pushing yourself.
It reminds me of a saying. You've heard the saying, perfection is the enemy of profit?
Yeah, right. or yeah, perfect is the enemy of the good, even.
Right, where it's like you're saying, like you see it in training too, where people are, a lot in weightlifting, where people are so focused on being flawless or being perfect in every aspect, in every regard, that they neglect, like your business partner, the other side of just kind of pushing the envelope forward and doing the right stuff, but not necessarily being focused entirely on having a flawless execution of this perfect model, but a great execution of the model that's in front of you, over and over and over again is going to push you forward more.
Yeah.
Something I definitely want to talk about in regards to goal setting is, and in hearing you talk about your sort of client intake process and all the different metrics that you're looking at for sleep, for diet, for blood work, for all this stuff, is the measurable quality of goals. Because whether it's in training or it's in business, you know, the big picture goal of business. I want to make more money,
Right.
or the you know, the sort of more I don't know what the word I'm looking for, the a bit more abstract goals of training. I want to improve my recovery. I want to improve my diet. I want to get stronger. Are so broad that it becomes very difficult for someone to be able to say, have I improved my recovery?
Yeah.
You know, so finding those metrics for it, I think is so important. And you know, so if it's in business and running like an online business like Juggernaut, it's, you know, how have we grown our YouTube following, and then, you know, how have we increased our average, you know, time on the page and conversion rates and all that stuff. As you look at your own training, whether it's powerlifting or bodybuilding training, how did you do some of that to find sort of those more short-term markers to know that you were moving in the right direction?
First of all, you have to see that there's a lot of different things that go into being successful. When people go to the gym and work out, that's only one portion of it. And we've talked about the sleeping is a huge deal, the eating is a huge deal, your hydration is a huge deal, and then all the planning and coordination that go into it. So I try and optimize every single one of those different variables. And that's what I do for people like Brian, Sean, and Hafthor. I dig in and try and find out if things that they do outside the gym are efficient enough to support what they do inside the gym. I talked in my Stress for Success rant about the fact that sometimes when you let your body, your mind, when you sacrifice sleep, exercise, and nutrition, that it negatively impacts business performance. And when I found myself getting too stressed or being less effective, not being as efficient, not being as successful in business, I almost always noticed that it was related to those deficiencies. Sleeping horribly, you know, I would sacrifice sleep to work more. And, you know, nowadays businesses will make their employees take vacations because they know that all of this supposed multitasking and all these extra hours gives this point of diminishing returns. And we see that in athletics as well. People want to go in the gym and train for 3 hours. Right. And I'd prefer if they go to the gym in the morning for 40 minutes and at night for 40 minutes. I think you'll become a lot more successful that way. My stepson's in college, and when he studies, I try not to have him look at all of the work at once. Just one topic, 40 minutes, there's the clock, and you get done what you can get done during that time.
Yeah.
If you improve everything, then everything improves. But if you leave something, don't pay attention to something and it becomes a deficiency, then it hurts the whole animal.
Yeah, and that reminds me of talking to a track coach, a guy named Don Babbitt, and he was the throws coach at the University of Georgia. He coached Reese Hoffa, multiple-time Olympian, Adam Nelson, multiple-time Olympian, Bro Greer, multiple-time Olympian, and he talked about for throwing, finding your indicators, and that he would try and identify 10 things for his athletes to make small improvements in. Because if their goal was to improve their result in the shot put by 10%, let's say for someone throwing 20 meters, the idea to throw 22 meters is overwhelming and daunting and is almost too big when that's all you think about to ever really embark upon that. Mm-hmm. But if they can say, okay, well, I know, you know, my bench press, my squat, my broad jump, my, you know, the quality of my nutrition, depending on how you want to measure that and kind of score it in a way, and so on and so forth. If I can improve each of those by 10%, you know, taking the bench from 400 to 440, the squat from 550 to 600, you know, a bunch of smaller, kind of more attainable goals along the way, and allow them to add up to that big goal.
It's a perfect example, and it's exactly the thing that Eddie Cohn said in a seminar I did with him last year. He said that he would, after a strength block and after a competition, he would deload and then do some hypertrophy training, and his concept of hypertrophy training is still progressive. He would find an exercise like behind the neck shoulder press or one-legged leg press or you know, Dorian rows or you know, any variation of the lifts, and then he would start attacking those in the same fashion that he would the power lifts, in that if he could improve 10%, if he could go from a 315 behind the neck press to a 350, and do the same thing with a variety of other exercises for different muscle groups, then his overall performance would improve in the next strength block. And he did that consistently over the course of years with these brief hypertrophy blocks. That's another big thing, is you have to look at things in a longer term scale and plan out a year or 5 years in advance to see the kind of progress that you want to see, because you can't get overwhelmed with, like you said, the enormity of trying to go from 20 meters to 22. Can be huge.
Something that I've found effective with my own powerlifters I work with, because as important as the goal setting is, just as important is the assessment of how it's going along the way, whether you're doing that through blood tests to assess those kind of things, or when you finish a training cycle or a meet competition, what I've had people do is just to identify 3 things that they felt they did very well during that training cycle, and 3 areas in which to improve upon for the next training cycle. And that ability for an athlete to be critical of themselves and not just go in and say, I went 8 for 9 or 9 for 9 and I made these PRs, even though there's a lot of positive things to build on there. If they walk away from it thinking, well, I'm doing everything perfect, it's going to be a very short time that those improvements continue.
We do that in business too. We say, if you were your boss, what would you tell yourself? If you were hired to be the CEO of your company today, what changes would you make today? And that always gets people to be more honest about the things that they've kind of been shuffling to the bottom of the deck. And those things generally can be more challenging, but they could be important action items that you have to address. So to be successful.
I mean, that's definitely one I'm taking to heart as the CEO of what we do here. So Max, what do you think you could do?
You're fired.
Last thing I want to talk to you about in this episode is something about your own training. I know you've struggled with a lot of knee issues, and that's kind of kept you away from being able to train the squat hard. And I'm sure that's something that a lot of our audiences struggled with either now or at some point in their career. You tell us about sort of how those problems came about, and then some of the workarounds you found. Because I really liked your post the other day when you're talking about the range of motion in training and how you've had this shift in sort of the way that you train your squat. So if you can talk about that.
Yeah, as you age or as you're competing at a higher and higher level, you're always going to come across injuries or repetitive strain. And as I've nudged up, now I'm 50, had the big 5-0 this year. And over the last 5 years, I haven't been competing. I've still been trying to train at a high level as best I can. But there's a few things that I implement. One is do no harm. And more recently, I read a book by Dr. Stuart Mcgill, The Back Mechanic, and that's one of the things he identifies is pain-free movements. We tend to get in this rut where we go to the gym and we do what we've always done. And when I got together with Flex Wheeler last year to help him train for the Mr. Olympia, one of the things we had to do, because he has been banged up, he's had surgeries, he's had lots of problems health-wise, was to try and find movement patterns that were pain-free and try and fix these lagging or nagging injuries that we've kind of just dealt with over the years. If you actually create that as your focus to actually heal or repair or fix or cure an injury, it can kind of free you from the self-obligation of doing a bunch of stuff that hurts you. So rather than focusing on, say, if you're still competing, the next competition and what you think you have to do to get there, the first goal is going to be to get healthy. And I do this with all my athletes that contact me that have if they have digestion issues, heartburn or GERD or irritable bowel syndrome, or if they've got joint problems or back injuries, the first thing we talk about is getting healthy. Or if they've got, like in Mark's case, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, high blood sugars, the first thing we focus on is getting healthy. And then from there, you can make a decision as to what your next goal should be. And so the key components to getting healthy, obviously, is dropping body fat, because that seems to be the hugest curator of blood pressure, blood sugars, cholesterol, etc. liver fat seems to be the driving force for all of those metabolic problems. So dropping body fat, I did that with Hafthor. We're doing that now with Brian Shaw. They're losing some weight, or Hafthor did, and then was able to gain weight later to get healthy. And then find pain-free movements. And Dr. Stuart Mcgill had talked in his book about once you find those pain-free movements, then you have to move. And I did the video recently about my knees. And I discovered that the banded leg presses were optimal for me. I didn't have any pain, and so I could continue to do them. And I did them with more frequency, more volume, gradually over time, and increased the range of motion. And I was able to, because to me, that's a key critical component, movement. Their bodies were meant to move. The more you lay around, the more you actually decay. And so I try and increase movement for all my athletes, hence the 10-minute walks, hence the higher frequency of training. But I try and make those repeated bouts more brief and potentially less fatigue building, unless we're focused, specifically going into a competition, in which case you got to kind of push the envelope. So I want a lot of movement, and I want a lot of pain-free movement, and I want a lot of and I want a good balance of that, so that your body can be healthy overall. And so I found pain-free movements. I moved a lot. And then I tried to avoid doing things that were obviously eliminating the source of the problem is critical. And I talk about the fact that when you're squatting and trying to keep a low bar position, that you're going to cause all kinds of problems in your elbows and shoulders. And if that is a problem, then you need to do a little less of that. You have to squat with a higher bar, or use a safety squat bar, or put your hands out further. Eliminate the source of the problem. I found the same thing with my hip injuries, that benching was causing the problem. So I had to bench with my feet up a lot and get better at that, so I could use my leg drive less. But apparently by turning my feet out and pushing hard, it was impinging my hip, and then I was having this ongoing problem with my hip injury. So that talks about a lot of things, really: hips, back, shoulders, knees. They all respond the same to eliminating the source of the problem, finding pain-free movements, and moving a lot through a greater range of motion. I think that's the healing component, is the movement.
I think something important to note in there too, that our friend Dr. Quinn Hennock talks a lot about, that is finding strategic loading for whatever the movement is, because it's not so much that there's a good exercise or a bad exercise, or people say, well, I squatted too much and it hurt my knees. It's like it's not that the squat did that. It's that specifically, yes, you squatted too much for what your body could tolerate. So being able to find and strike that proper balance of frequency, intensity, and volume, I think is a really critical thing.
Yeah. And you're supposed to push your body somewhere it hasn't been before, in order for it to adapt, which you have to, it's a gradual process. If you do it too much or too fast, then it's going to break down. Dr. Stuart Mcgill worked with Brian Carroll on a book that they collaborated on and put out called The Gift of Injury, which I also read recently, which is an awesome read for anybody who wants to pick that up. And Brian Carroll's back injuries were some of the worst that I've seen. He had 2 herniated discs. He had a crushed disc. He had a actual crack in his sacrum. His bone was splitting like this. And, he was done. He was terribly injured. And Dr. Mcgill, by stopping, the damage first, eliminating the source of the problem, and then slowly testing it and letting it heal. I don't say testing, it's the right word, but stressing it and letting it heal. Stressing it in a good way, meaning that it's a pain-free movement. The bone actually healed itself, which those who understand the research, that it can heal stronger than before, actually, when the bones are allowed the opportunity to heal. And he was able to get the musculature of his lower back area and abdominals and core and lats strong enough without continuing to injure the lumbar spine, that the muscles can, through proper movement patterns, will lift the weight, and the spine itself will be relieved of the pressure that was causing all of the aggravation of the problems, the herniated disc. You don't necessarily cure those problems, the herniation or the compressed disc or the crushed disc. You don't necessarily cure those problems, and you see that with people with shoulders as well. You see that if they have shoulder injuries, if they're able to improve the musculature of the surrounding area, even with a torn tendon in your shoulder, in your rotator cuff, or where have you, even if you have something torn, if you build up all the other muscles around it, you can do pain-free movements at a very high level without having to go in and have surgery. I'm really cautious about surgery. Dr. Stuart Mcgill recommends very few people to surgery. He thinks that through proper rehabilitation you can fix the problem. Surgery generally tends to cause more problems than it solves. And we've seen this in the results, spinal fusions now. They're finding out that it was a huge mistake. It just moves the problem somewhere else. And they're recommending not to do that. You have to be cautious how much manipulation you do, because you might be creating problems, not solving them. There's only a very small percentage of people who respond to manipulation, maybe 20% from what the best research suggests. So you have to be cautious about, as I said before, going to someone else to try and fix your problem. Things that people do to you or for you are rarely as effective as things you do for yourself. You have to put the work in. You have to very, very deliberately and consistently, with a plan over time, get rid of the pain of the source of the problem, find pain-free movements, and then move. That's going to be much more effective than, say, a massage or a chiropractic treatment or some cryotherapy or some pills that you pop. It's going to be much, much more effective. The movement is the critical component. We've even seen with sham surgeries on both knees and shoulders, where a surgeon will actually, they'll do a study with 2 groups of people, and a surgeon will actually perform the surgery, the knee surgery on one, and on another group, they actually did a sham surgery. They didn't fix anything. They brought them in, they cut them, sewed them up, didn't fix anything. They had an equivalent recovery. And we see that with back problems too, that you're just as likely to recover with surgery as without. There's not necessarily an improvement to be had there. So wow. I would really encourage people to read The Back Mechanic and look at Dr. Mcgill's stuff. And there's other people that do a really good job. I think Dr. Bo Hightower's one I just saw recently on the podcast with Mike Dolce, who is a really, really smart guy he's got 2 doctorates, working on a 3rd, and he works with a lot of fighters, UFC fighters, etc. And he's a huge proponent of trying to heal your own body rather than getting surgeries. I would strongly recommend against that. The first thing I ask somebody who has a back problem is when they tell me they have a back problem is, are you doing sit-ups? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, well, you need to stop that. That's another example of doing things that actually create the problem. People who do a lot of sit-ups, as you know, tend to cause lumbar back problems.
That's why I don't have a six-pack.
Yeah.
I don't want to hurt my back.
Well, it's a stabilizer, not a flexor. The whole core is a stabilizer, not a flexor. I have a video up where I did a bunch of recovery work with Mark Philippi. It's under Stan Efferding Mobility on YouTube. And one of the things that we did was core stabilization exercises, not sit-ups, where I would hold onto a stick and he would push it one way and then the other, and I would have to resist it. One of the things Dr. Stuart Mcgill does is he does planks and side planks, and what he calls stirring the pot, where you use a Bosu ball with your elbows and your feet are behind you in a plank position. And anything that resists movement. Some of the best exercises for throwers have been the medicine ball throws for years. Those have been really effective for the side movement.
Yeah, and I definitely found that to be true for myself. I had 2 herniated discs, came back to squat 70 pounds heavier than I had prior to the injury.
There you have it.
And it was both the gift of injury idea that it was a time that forced me to assess what caused this, how can I fix that, and
because you compensate.
Yeah, and led me to change a lot of things about the structure of my training, both from an exercise selection standpoint, technique, and the overall organization of the training, but led me to all these, the diaphragmatic breathing drills that Dr. Quinn Hennock taught to me, and going from training weighted sit-up type of movements into a lot more of the breathing and bracing, that neutral spine position. It was extremely, profoundly powerful in improving my training and just wellness.
That's why you see me do a lot of weighted carries, and I do those with a lot of athletes, soccer players and basketball players that I don't want them doing a whole lot of core flexion exercises. And so that's, you know, another good substitution that actually solves the problem instead of creates it.
Yeah. Montana, anything to add?
That's all good.
All right. Well, this was another episode of the JuggLife podcast. Thank you, Stan, for joining us for the second time. I want to say you may actually have our most popular episode ever.
Really? Which was that? When we did the weighted carries?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
you did the 20s? That was awesome.
Oh. At least it was for one of us.
Because you were doing them and not me. That's why it was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you enjoy the JuggLife, please go on iTunes, leave us a 5-star review, and write us something funny and or nice, and maybe we'll read it on the air, and you could get a free shirt or something like that. Like Mick Meatbag. I don't think that's his real name. Great podcast featuring a lovely bromance between Chad Wesley Smith and Miraculous Max Montana, a.k.a. the Bulgarian guy, which is only eclipsed by the excellent quality of information and guests they provide on a weekly basis. If there was only one podcast you could listen to and you are remotely interested in strength sports, lifting, or alternative lifestyles, yeah.
Not sure what that means.
I think I know, but this is the one that you should choose every time. So thank you, Mr. McMeatbag. If you send me an email, chat@jtsstrength.com, I'll get you over a little thank you gift for writing that nice review of the JuggLife. We have a lot of events upcoming, starting off on February 10th, which will be at Black Iron Gym in Reno, Nevada for JuggLife Live. And this is the first in a couple of events like this that we're going to do. Where first we'll have a little Snatch clinic with Max, with American record holder Keanu Welch and Team Juggernaut lifter Alexandra LaChance, and then stay after the clinic for sort of the lecture and Q&A part of things, which we'll be recording as an episode. There's going to be trivia and contests for you guys to win stuff, food, drinks. It'll be a good time. After that, Max will be in the Netherlands on February 17th doing a clinic. What's the name of the gym?
Stark CrossFit.
Stark CrossFit, and you can email him, max@jtsstrength.com, to learn more about that. The same day, or same weekend, I will be in Chicago at Midwest Strength and Performance. One day doing a lecture on program design, the next day doing hands-on coaching. And after that, Australia. Marissa and I will be touring around Australia, Brisbane, Canberra, and Melbourne between March 11th and 16th. You can sign up for all those at store.jtsstrength.com under the events. Max and I will be coming to New York for another series of JuggLife Live, so look for the registration to open up for those soon. And yeah, that's about it on the event front. If you're interested in our online coaching services, weightlifting, powerlifting, super total, or the new club Power Building with Marissa Inda, learn about that at juggernautcoaching.com. We are always proud of the content we provide here at the Juggernaut Training Systems YouTube channel, releasing 3 videos per week. So every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, look for some new content from us. And you can find the JuggLife podcast on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and thejugglife.com. Stan, where can they find you, learn more about you?
StanEfferding.com. That's the great thing about having a unique name. At Stan Efferding on Instagram, Stan Efferding on YouTube. That's where you'll find me.
I looked for chadsmith.com. It was taken.
Yeah. So.
And Max?
You can find me on Instagram, Max_Ada, or on Facebook, MaxAda.
And I'm Chad Wesley Smith, at Chad Wesley Smith, and at Juggernaut Training on Facebook and Instagram, filling up your newsfeed all day. This was the JuggLife podcast. Thanks for watching and or listening, and we'll see you next week.